Good morning. We're going to be in Proverbs 13 today. We're in that section 10 through 15 where there's a lot of pithy statements. There's not a lot of like chapters like we had before where there was the temptuous woman or some type of thing like that. That each one is kind of standing on its own, but there are themes throughout, which is why I titled this The Wise Righteous One versus the Wicked Fool, because you're going to see that theme kind of play throughout. And we're going to just kind of do this in our usual fashion. So if I can have, first before we begin, did everyone get a chance to meet Dante and Jacqueline and welcome them to the class?
What's your name?
Cassidy.
Cassidy, Colby, and Adam. Okay.
Right.
So we're going to try to get through the first 12 verses today. We'll see how far we get, but hopefully everybody has a handout. So somebody want to read the first verse for us there?
A wise son heeds and is the fruit of his father's instruction and correction, but a scoffer listens not to rebuke. This is the Amplified.
Yeah, no, I love it. So the commentary I grabbed from this, and I believe I forgot to put the reference there, but I believe that was from the Believer's Bible Commentary. But I thought it was a good point here. And we had a little bit of a discussion on it this morning. When it says a father's wisdom, you've got to take this both in the physical and the spiritual realm, okay? So some of us have great fathers. I know there's some people in this room that have very godly fathers, and there's some that don't. I'm in the latter category, right? So, but we all have a Father in heaven, right? And ultimately, we need to focus on the Father in heaven, and we need to make sure that we're applying this spiritually. We need to honor our mother and father here, and that particular verse has no caveats. You know, there's lots of times when I've wanted to put caveats in that, especially if you had a challenging childhood, but there are no caveats. You're supposed to honor them regardless, right? So that makes it tough. Now, you have to have boundaries in that, obviously, but there's no caveats in that. So, and I found it kind of freeing once I got past that. After being scarred as a child, you hang on to that and the bitterness that comes with it. But once you forgive and you just honor them where they are, and you just realize that, you may have to keep a safe distance, but forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things, right? And I know I may be taking the father-son thing in a different direction, but that is a common problem we have. And even if you have a great father, you probably have friends that may not have had a great father, or this analogy is lost on them, right? When they think, a father, and the father picture in their mind was one of abuse or something else, then this verse falls flat. So we need to be able to make sure that we're, in Paul's words, all people to all, or what is it? All things to all people, so that we may save some. I think I got that right. Any other thoughts or comments on that verse?
My version says a wise son or daughter desires a father's discipline, but the know-it-all never listens to correction.
Yes, and that's a great point. We've made that before. Obviously, when it says son, it means son or daughter. But it's a good reminder that we need to be thinking of that. And I'm in the midst of living this through on both ends, right? Because I have a couple of prodigal children now. So I'm having to live through this, on both sides.
We can relate.
Okay, yeah. Then that's not a walk. I think that one in some ways is harder than the former, when you're on this end of it.
I think it's such a mark of maturity to be able to handle rebuke or instruction, and it just seems, maybe just in my workplace at the moment, it just seems so lost. It's taken personally as an attack, and of course how you frame it is important, but how beneficial instruction and rebuke can be if you take it.
I would agree. You know, I was listening to Tucker Carlson hosted Charlie Kirk's one of his podcasts, and they were reminiscing about stories. And he and Charlie were really tight friends, but Charlie had a way of kind of changing Tucker's viewpoint on several things, and he had a way of kind of disagreeing. But Charlie, on the other hand, Tucker changed his view on things, so it went both ways. Because
iron sharpens iron.
Yeah, it was the iron sharpens iron. So Charlie's theology was fairly spot on, but you know, like in the podcast it talked about marijuana, for instance, and Charlie initially was a big fan of marijuana, you know, meaning that, you know, really it doesn't do that much harm, it's all this. And then Tucker kind of opened his eyes that, you know, okay, you want freedom, and if you want freedom and you don't want government tyranny, you do realize that the government is using marijuana and wants you impaired, because if you're impaired, you're easier to control, right? So he kind of spun it around in a different way that he hadn't quite thought of it, you know? And, you know, Charlie ended up changing his.
He ended up saying that's a gateway drug
Yeah.
to harder things like
Yeah,
fentanyl.
he ended up changing his position on that, which was very, you know, when you're talking on college campuses, that's a tough position to take, right?
Yes.
And that was an area that Charlie actually changed on via Tucker. Most of it was the other way around, as you can imagine. But I thought that was fascinating.
Well, and this also, you look at a lot of great leaders. Your greater leaders have a lot of people who advise them, and they listen to their advisors. If you have the other faulty leaders, they're always their idea.
Yeah, and biblically speaking, we have those examples in the Bible, right? Like Solomon's son, you know, he didn't listen to the wise counsel, right?
That's right.
And the kingdom ended up divided, right? Because he listened to his friends over the wise counsel of the elders. And, you know, there's
And
definitely.
we see that in society now where the younger children or the crowd, you know, youngsters, they tend to look to what their peers had to say instead of what their parents had to say, and I think that's where a downfall.
But I think balancing that, I'm seeing a lot of encouraging things of the younger church, and that's to me where the revival is. And they're not beholden to all the traditions, and that younger generation can see our faults very clearly. Like, we've spent 50 years being the silent majority, and we've let the world go to hell in a handbasket because we weren't being salt and light. And I think the younger generation sees that, and they don't want to make that mistake, you know. And that end, I'm very hopeful. Somebody want to read 2 and 3?
A man shall eat well by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the unfaithful feeds on violence. He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction.
So I'll read this from the Life Application Bible. You have not mastered self-control if you do not control what you say. Words cut and destroy. James recognized this truth when he said, the tongue is a flame of fire, its whole world of wickedness. James 3:16. If you want to be self-controlled, begin with your tongue. Stop and think before you react or speak. If you can control this small but powerful member, you can control the rest of your body. I thought that was well written. We've talked a lot about this, and probably Adam and Cassidy have heard me say it many times, but I think it's worth mentioning again. As children of God, we're the child of a creator. So we have the ability to create, okay? That ability is also a responsibility, okay? So when you speak out of your tongue, you are literally creating, and you can create things that align with God, or you can create things that align with evil. And both of them are sowing and reaping. And the enemy is not made in the image of God. He is not a creator, and he is dependent on us to do his work for him. God chooses, right? God chooses to use us, whereas the enemy has to use us. The enemy cannot create.
Good point.
And what we speak out of our mouths, we create. And I was in DC recently, where I teach, and I was talking with a colleague that happened to be there on travel, and she was just plagued with like fear. I mean, you could feel the spirit of fear on her, and she was just so worried about things that she can't control, you know. And you know, she was doing counseling for her marriage, and she was worried about her family and all this, and it's just fear. And we were having a talk, and I'm trying to, you know, but you have faith, right? Oh yeah, I have faith, but, you know, and it's faith, but, and that's what, and she would just, she's laughing, and she just gets spun up, you know, with the fear, and just, I mean, it was kind of sad, right? And at one point she'd get so spun up she wouldn't listen. And I said, look, I finally broke down, and I said, look, I said, you may think you're the only one, but you're not. And I told her about my prodigal children and the situation I'm walking in. And I said, look, I have confidence. I have hope. I have no idea what the end is, but I know God is in control. And I choose to trust in that and not embrace the fear. I said, I would make myself crazy if I embraced all the what ifs on this. And I said, this boils down to a choice. And I think it finally clicked in her. But so many of us embrace the fear, and the fear is out there. Y'all know it. You see it every day, right? The fear sells. What are y'all's thoughts?
I think that to respond is a positive way to deal with a situation, and to react is a negative way. And most of us live in a react mode. So, and like you were saying, that we're creative and the devil's not. So to react is just trying to, if you break that word down, to repeat that action. And you cannot do that in a fear-based mindset.
Absolutely. I think you've been reading ahead of my notes, because I actually have one of the verses is to seek understanding before reaction, which I had a good friend, Chris, that was one of his favorite sayings. Because if you really think about it, when something offends you, when you get something, our knee-jerk reaction is to react. But if you step back and you try to understand it, and you try to say, okay, what is this person really saying? Why are they saying it? What's the context? You know, a lot of times there's a deeper thing here, and you're missing it because you're emotionally reacting instead of actually trying to understand the person said that hateful thing because they're hurting, because maybe this happened to them, and maybe I need to be praying about that hurt or something that's in them that I'm feeling as an arrow, but they're just doing what they got poured into them, right? And you know, and so a lot of times, yes, a lot of times we focus on the impact to us, and we don't stop and think, right? You know, it's like that powerful, you know, Erica talking at that memorial, right? I mean, how do you do that, right? You can't. The only way she could do that is through Christ, right?
Sure, that's that peace that passes all understanding.
And love is the greatest weapon. You know, the Bible's clear on that. You know,
Love
pray for your enemies, and
multitude.
it's like pouring coals on their head, right? So we've got to lean into the strengths. We gotta be smarter, fight the battle spiritually, not get wrapped up into the mud wrestling pigs, which I know I've done it.
A lot of times it's a wounded spirit, and that's a symptom you're seeing of that deeper thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better to get understanding than riches and gold.
Yep, absolutely.
One thing that I started this week, and it really drove home on watching, you need to download that for everybody. That's
The
very
Hurry
powerful.
podcast?
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Very
awesome.
powerful.
What was it?
I think I put it in the Telegram chat, but
Oh, what again? Tell me.
but I'll, yeah, there's a podcast. It goes through the disciplines, practicing the way, and it talks about hurry. And it looks at it in a way that I hadn't seen before. Like the enemy, all he has to do instead of attacking you is just fill your schedule, right? Because if he can just fill your schedule and he can convince you that it's so important to get your kids involved in 3 sports and go to the games and do all this and do that and even work for the church, you know, even get involved in ministry, and you've got to do this and got to do that, then he can schedule your calendar so full that you have no time with him.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden you're disarmed. So now you're a good target because you've had no time with the Father, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn to say no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I
Healthy
started this
boundaries.
week was getting into the Word every morning, quiet time,
Mm-hmm.
and start reading Joshua. It will take a lot of worries away. Talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
how he just. and
I
it's-
love chapter 1.
We forget how powerful our God is,
Absolutely.
and He can subdue anything. He can make our enemies or their footstool.
Yeah.
And I just,
Mhm.
that whole thing in Joshua, just thinking about just the fact of even him subduing all those thousands of people. But these guys, you imagine slaying all these people, and they're still got energy to keep on going.
Oh, yeah.
They say a 2-minute fight is like running 10 miles.
Yeah.
So can you imagine just going through it, and then you still got energy to keep on going? And then when he made the day stand still,
Oh, yeah. That's what I was
I
thinking.
mean, you don't wear out.
And then how much faith do you have to even pray that prayer, right? I mean, that's the amazing thing to me is it's one thing for God to do it. It's a whole nother thing for Joshua to believe that God would do it and to pray it, right? I mean, that's to me where my failure comes, right? Is I go, hey, that prayer is too big. Cody, you ain't stepping there. Yeah, that's where I have to have my self-talk, and I have to remind myself of how big my God is.
All
Right.
power.
Yeah.
Instead of leaning on that, you stand on that.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
That's good. That'll preach. Okay, 34 or 13:4. Sorry.
The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied.
So this is talking, and we've talked about that in class too. This is our society is a microwave society. We run on sound bites. That's one of the reasons why I love podcasts, because they're like hours long and you get a little deeper, instead of a sound bite, that's our culture, sound bites, and even our food. We put it in the microwave instead of, the air fryer, because it's a few minutes faster, knowing that it's gonna not taste as good, right? And we don't take the time to make a home cooked meal. We'll just hit a drive-through, even though we know, but a lot of us do. So in this culture, right? And so my point is things that take time. When you look back on your life, the things that were the hardest things, those are the things that give you the most joy and gratitude, right? It's not the easy things, but we're so wired to get the easy thing. Take the easy thing. Don't do this because it's too hard or it takes too long, And we have a mentality that is way different. If you just go back to like the American Revolution, like those people that signed the Declaration of Independence, they pledged their life, their liberty, their wealth, they did everything. And they were thinking generations down the road. They weren't thinking just the next generation. They were thinking their grandkids, and they were able to lay it on the line. And we grew up with that mentality here, and through corporatism and everything else, it's just kind of lost. But we all had, we all had businesses, and you built your business up and you passed it down to your kid, and then they grew it, and it was something that was going to be a legacy, that was ongoing. And we've lost that, and now it's like, okay, this job's going to pay me 10 grand more, so I'll move. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
And go ahead.
legacy is what the word I was hearing stick out there. Yeah, thinking of others rather than not being able to see past on nose on your face.
Exactly. It's doing the hard things, right? We choose not to do the hard things. And if you go back and you look at your life, at least in my case, I can look back in my life and I can see the blessings were really in the hard things. They weren't in the easy things. It's the hard things. So I want to do the hard things.
The path
I'm
of
now
least
at my
resistance.
point in life where I want to do the hard things, because I want that blessing. I want that satisfaction that can only come from the hard thing, right? That's not the fleeting satisfaction. Go ahead, Adam.
I've always looked at tribulations and stuff that we go through. That's the Lord. We confuse it a lot of times with the evil one, but it's really a lot of it's the Lord strengthening us. One of my theories about the generations, as the generations get weaker, you look at our past generations, the ones that fought World War II, World War I, came back home and got on with their lives. They went through major tribulations and made them stronger. And we are the generation after that, and we have not had major turmoils like that. We haven't had to, every one of us, all us men, decide to go overseas and fight an evil desire that's fixing to take over the world, and we've become softer. That's one of my theories.
Yeah, I think there's a saying about that. What is it? Good times make soft men, and hard times make hard men, or something to that effect. I forget what the saying, but there's a cycle, right? Because then the hard times make the hard men, which create good times, which then create, the cycle, because everything, Ecclesiastes, right? Solomon, there's nothing new under the sun. So it's a cycle that we go through.
Anything worthwhile requires effort.
Yeah, and it's biblical too, right? Jesus sent the disciples into the storm, right? He prayed, said, I'll meet you on the other side,
But you gotta get
right?
there.
And he sent them in the storm. And then you go back and you read that passage carefully, and he was walking by them on the water when they cried out. And then he kind of lightly rebukes them, about their faith. Because he told them, I'm going to meet you on the other side. But they got lost looking at the waves and the storm. And isn't that us, right? Maybe it's just me.
And as soon as they got in the boat, they were right on the other side.
Yep.
Not even a storm, even a tiny hill. Oh man,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
And then I would reflect and I went, oh, I'm so soft. It's
Yeah.
lazy.
Yeah.
Anything good requires effort.
Okay, 5 and 6. Who'd like to read?
A righteous man hates lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame. Righteousness guards him whose way is blameless, but wickedness overthrows the sinner.
So the Life Application Bible, I thought, put this pretty good, so I'll quote theirs here. Blameless living safeguards your life. Every choice for good sets in motion other opportunities for good. Evil choices follow the same pattern, but in the opposite direction. Each decision you make to obey God's word will bring a greater sense of order in your life, while each decision to disobey will bring confusion and destruction. Right choices you make reflect your integrity, obedience brings the greatest safeguard and security. Yeah. So obedience is the hardest word, right? And obedience is what we're called to do. We're called to keep the commandments. Probably the least quoted thing on the Great Commission is keep the commandments, right? We focus on all the other, and I might argue that some of our techniques, are a little dated and may not be the way Jesus did it, Jesus. But he never evangelized. He did follow me, right? Do you understand what I mean? That was his message, was follow me. So we get so caught up in this culture of saying some words, and we don't do the follow-up. We don't do like Paul did in Acts, where he went back and lapped around to every church that he went, and we're really bad on follow-up. And another thing that I see is the church is, because of righteousness and obeying and other stuff, they don't have the full power. And the people see that, right? Like Charlie Kirk, as great as he was, his greatness was because of the power that he had, right? He had power from God because he had chose to be righteous. He had chose to obey, and that drew the people in. It wasn't his magnificent words. Yes, he did the study. He did all that, but he had the power of Christ in him. And that true power is what draws people. It's that power of Christ. It's having that righteousness. It's getting close. And people don't want to. What?
I want to see what that is.
Yeah.
People.
And people want it draws people to you, right? Whereas a lot of our people, they may be curious, but they can clearly see that there's no power. There's no real transformation. So it's kind of like you're selling an empty promise. If you're saying God does all this and you're not seeing the transformation, then it's an empty promise. But if you're walking around and your testimony is a changed life, and you have other people that are changed lives, then people are going to see that, and you're going to see that. And there's that proximity principle, right? And people don't want to pay the price to get close to God, right? There's a cost of getting close to God. Ananias and Sapphira, right? What was their big sin? It wasn't, they lied, right? It wasn't the amount that they gave. It was the fact that they lied. And when you get close to God, there's a whole level of righteousness that you have to ask God for. It's not our righteousness. You ask Him for, and then you also have to be listening for God to say, okay, Cody, you need to give this up, right? Like, you can only get this far until you give this up. And then you give this up, and you get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. But you can't get too close. Like Uzziah, right? Touched the ark, died, right? Because he got too close, right? So there's that closeness. We want the power, but we don't want to do the stuff to get the power, to get the righteousness, to get close enough. It's a gift, but it's a two-way gift. I heard it explained this way. I was listening to the podcast because, like I said, I have plenty of time. That when you accept Christ, think of it this way. You accept Christ, you're a new creation, okay? I'm planting trees right now, okay? So you plant them, they're originally like a seed, okay? When God gives you your new creation, it's a seed. It's a seed in all areas of your life. It is a full new creation. But which one are you watering? How are you taking care of that? Right? It's the seed. It's the potential to do all that. But He's not going to do it for you. Just like Adam talked with Joshua, right? What was the promise to Joshua? I'll give you everywhere you set foot on, right? So you have to step out, you have to water, you have to cultivate, you have to grow that.
be involved.
Right. It's through him, but he chooses to work through us broken vessels.
It's not passive.
Right. It's not. It's very active. Right. 3:7.
There is one who makes himself rich, it has nothing, and one who makes himself poor, it has great riches.
Okay, so this can be taken physical riches, it can be taken spiritual riches, it can be taken a lot. There's a great book, I've recommended it in this class before. It was written by the witch doctor, remember, that came to Christ. Fascinating. And he tells a story in there where he's following this prophet of God around, and the guy he thinks he must be evil, because he goes to this, they're kind of like biblical times where they didn't bring a money bag and that kind, or they brought very little. So he goes and he spends the night, and this guy says, well, you can sleep in the barn, but you're gonna have to pay this. And he charges him a rate like 5 times the going rate. He's rich, evil. And the guy says, absolutely, just pays him. And the guy's going, why? And then he goes, something else happens, I forget. And then the third one I remember was, he comes to this bridge, and there's this daughter, and she's relatively young, and she's suicidal, and she's tormented and all this, and she's standing on the bridge, and he's thinking the guy's going to save her, and he pushes her over. And he's thinking, this guy is evil. Why am I following? I thought I was supposed to be following this holy guy, and he's evil. And the guy sits him down and talks with him. He goes, here's what you don't know. He says, the rich man there, I've already seen where he's going. He's chosen his blessings in this life. I gave them to him. That girl, she was going to keep being tormented. There was no hope for her in this world. Furthermore, she was going to bring down her mother that was on the verge right now. So I sent her to heaven early so that I could save her mom and her family, right? And we look at things totally different, right? And that's why when you see verses like this, you say, the man who makes him rich, yet he has nothing. His riches may be here, and they may be his whole life, but think about what his reward is there. He may be choosing. God can bless your choice, but you may have to live with your choice. It's like C.S. Lewis says, there is no one in hell that didn't actively choose hell. Right? So if you've actively chose it, then your reward may be right here. You may get to live like Black Rock, which, by the way, they have no peace, but you'll have plenty of riches. Does that make sense?
I read a parenting article this week, and they framed it much more eloquently, but when a child has a consequence to whatever they did, and framing it towards, okay, but you made this choice, thus you chose this consequence, knowing that if you did this, this was a consequence. I didn't choose that for you. You chose that consequence, and kind of
That's very good.
to give them the ownership of that.
Very good. Okay, let's go on to 8. We're flying now. 8 verses. They're probably only on 2 verses downstairs. Lots of rabbit trails. We do quite a few here that I can't say, but Lance is great.
The footnote for verse 7 in the Passion, it says it's never godly to be a phony. It's always better to be who you are and avoid pretense.
Oh, yeah, there's another verse, I don't think we've gotten to it yet here, but it actually talks about that very subject of the pretense and pretending and
So
fake.
it says one pretends to be rich but is poor, another pretends to be poor but is quite rich.
Yes.
So that is the spiritual application.
Yeah, we talked about that this morning. I'm glad you reminded me. I see it takes a village here. The gray hair. Must be losing it. We talked about that this morning because there's a lot of people that aren't really rich, but they're living off credit cards and they're living a lifestyle that doesn't support their means. They're pretending.
Yeah, facade.
And the crazy thing about that, of course, is all that pretending causes extreme strife of the debt and no peace in their house, and they end up normally in bankruptcy and divorced, and I've seen it time and time again. There was a great commercial. You could probably Colby, you're probably better on YouTube than I am, but you could probably find it. But there was a great commercial that used to be on TV, and it had the guy with a small yard, and he's driving on his lawnmower, and he goes, "I'm in debt to my eyeballs," you know. But that was a perfect picture, right? Because you want the house, you want the riding lawnmower, even though you don't need it, right? You know, it's just consumerism just taken so far that, you know.
We get lost in it.
Yeah. One of those other ones, you were talking about the hurry thing. He talks about minimalism and kind of cutting things out of your life on another one.
Possessions have a way of possessing you.
Yes, that's the key, right? Is do you possess the possessions or do they possess you? Right. That's definitely the key.
My uncle used to coach in Highland Park, and there was a lot of houses down there that were completely empty because people had no money to fill them up. There were just empty houses just so they could be in the school district
Yep.
to play Highland Park.
Yeah, they used to rent, like, you couldn't find an apartment or a condo there because they would just rent them or buy them just to be in the school
Oh,
district.
wow.
Our kids used to play them in football. That was always one of my favorite games. One of my best memories was getting to beat them in football. Have to confess. Because each one of them has like a personal coach, right? Like their parents pay for them like a life coach, an athletic coach, like an individual coach just on them, right? So, I mean, the amount of wealth was just unbelievable. So beating them was a huge thing. Like, I think it only happened like twice in middle school history. And my son was on one of the teams.
And is that training them up in the way they should go? Is that their God-given talent that should be poured
Right.
in?
They're bent.
Yeah. Okay, let's read 8 and 9, kind of catch up here.
The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor does not hear rebuke. The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked will be put out.
Okay, there's a couple of different takes on this ransom of a man's riches. One, which I thought was kind of interesting, I hadn't quite thought of it that way, was that only a rich man is going to be kidnapped, because the poor they don't even have to worry about that possibility, right? So, and then his riches are only going to rescue him for his life here. Right? Do you follow the analogy? So I thought that was an interesting take on it. And then essentially the other part of that is the poor don't have to worry about it. They're not going to be kidnapped for money, right? So a lot of the things that we worry about is because of our possessions, our wealth, and they don't have those worries. Like you go to a third world country and a lot of those people are very happy. They're a lot happier than us because they don't have all those possessions to worry about. They have happiness in very simple things. And 13:9 here, the light of the righteous rejoices, and the lamp of the wicked is put out. Well, that has two connotations. The putting out of the wicked can be in the physical, like in the case of King David, when I'm trying to think who was Nabal's wife that met him halfway. Spacing on the name, but anyway, his men protected Nabal and all of his flocks and his herds, and then he went for payment when it was time to shear the sheep, and they mistreated his servants and all that, and he reacted instead of seeking understanding, right? And then he sent out 400 of his men, and he took an oath and said, I'm going to slay every man and Nabal's family and whatever for treating me this way, right? And then on the way, the wife had heard how they had mistreated King David, and then she brought the donkeys and the spices, and then she interceded on behalf of the household and said, don't get bloodshed on you, leave vengeance for God, right? Don't do this, leave vengeance for God. And then God ended up physically striking him down, probably I think within a week or so, roughly is. So that's an area of the physical, and of course the spiritual we know, but there's several accounts of the physical too, of being your life snuffed out. Go ahead.
Verse 8 in the Passion, the self-assurance of the rich is their money. The Aramaic is the salvation of the soul is a man's true wealth.
Yes, absolutely. And that speaks to the spiritual side. Thank you for sharing. Let's do verse 10, and we're probably gonna have to wrap it there, so we can get to the tent revival.
By pride comes nothing but strife, but with the well-advised is wisdom.
So, pride, you know, it's the original sin, right? It goes all the way back. And, you know, if we really think about it, there's a quote here from C.S. Lewis, and I'll read this. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. Other vices may sometimes bring people together. You may find good fellowship, jokes, and friendliness around drunken people or unchastised people. But pride always means enmity. It is enmity, and not only enmity between man and man, but enmity between man and God. So think about that. I mean, think about multiple levels. But we know, and we're beaten up probably on the pride in our relationship with the Father. But pride in the interpersonal relationships, looking horizontally, is a root to almost all the conflict you see. In the workplace, at school, you know, even in the church, you know, people get offended, right? When you're offended, why are you offended?
Because your pride got in the way.
Yes, right? You get offended because of pride.
You're in the flesh.
Right? So if you're more humble, you're not going to fall for those tactics of the enemy to create division and offense and strife and gossip and backbiting and, you know, all of these things. And it ties in with what we were talking about before, the tongue, right? And you're speaking things out, you know, and you're creating, right? What are you creating?
Ego stands for edging God out.
Yes.
And pride, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble.
And pride comes before the fall, right?
Haughtiness before destruction. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And pride is one of those things, and it's one of those things is you're never there. Right? When you finally say you're humble, you're taking pride in being humble.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So you're never there, but it's a work in progress.
It's a walk,
right?
not a talk.
It's a walk and it's a talk. And you have to have humility. I mean, I'll tell one more story. I have a boss, and he's a good guy, but he's, you know, kind of type A. He's kind of wound up a little bit. And I've had to have multiple talks with him because staff, especially now, you know, this newer generation, and it's not just that, some of them are great, but a lot of them just don't have basic interpersonal skills because they've spent their time online, right? And he gets offended by that. Like, I'm your boss and you just walked by me and you didn't even say hi. You didn't even acknowledge me. I'm your boss, I'm doing your performance review, you know, or another person, you know, that is quite, I don't know how to say it, but she's kind of toxic. But, you know, there's an expectation theory, right? Like if you know that person is toxic. You know that person is going to cause division, derision, stress, other stuff. You should have an expectation. You should carry yourself because you don't want her issues to impair your life. You're giving control over your peace, your well-being if you let them. You
don't
have an
let her lead the
excuse.
meeting.
Right. You have an excuse the first time to be upset when someone does that. The second time you're in audience with that person, your expectation should already be there. You don't have permission to get all upset and get angry and talk about it 3 weeks later because it happened the second time, right? At that point, you're giving up control of your peace to someone else, right? And that's kind of the conversation I had to have with him multiple times in counseling, you know, really just on a human relational standpoint. And this is where it all gets to. It's pride, right? It's all about pride on both sides.
And that's the devil's MO.
Yeah,
And
We have to be the
That's why
opposite.
he got booted out of heaven.
absolutely. The original.
Well,
Yeah,
we have
the
to
fall.
out of the garden.
Yeah,
Right?
It's
Won't
all
be like
pride.
God.
it's all pride.
I think I've shared before, but when I've come across times with that, if I start to, or if I challenge myself to pray for that person, and that not only disarms them, I think, but also myself. If I can't find the peace to pray for someone because I'm so angry, it helps to disarm
Robs you
myself.
of your joy.
No, that's a great tip. That's a great tip. It's amazing how many times prayer changes us.
Right.
Right? We're looking to change the situation, and
But it was
God,
for me
meanwhile,
all the
is
time.
working on us, right?
When it's hard to pray, pray harder.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's a good one. Colby, can you pray us out?
Yes, sir. Dear Lord, thank you for this time that we have together to get closer to you and learn about you. Bless the tent revival and watch over us this week. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.